തുടങ്ങിയില്ലല്ലേ?
ഇല്ല 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 ഇല്ല.
കേട്ടായിരിക്കും.
Welcome, Jason Matthew. Jason Matthew from Delhi. Most welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Sir.
Hello. Would you please check the last, you are on laptop or on mobile? I have sent you an email, the last one. Last one. You click on that Google Meet. Okay, but it's not okay. Yeah, the technical expert is handling it. Just let me just check it. Noble, and Dr. Yadav failed, couldn't join by clicking the link. Laptop on. Google Meet എടുത്തിട്ട് അവസാനത്തിൽ മാത്രം ടൈപ്പ് ചെയ്ത് കൊടുക്കാൻ പറയാം അല്ലേ? Doctor, you open the Google Meet first and then type the last link, not the HTTP etc. You cut off the last 3.
Last 10 alphabets.
If it is email, if you click, you should get it.
Thomas Yonacha, good evening.
No, good evening. Good evening, sir.
അച്ഛാ 8 മണിയായി, നമുക്ക് തുടങ്ങിയല്ലോ.
ഇല്ല.
Dr. Yadav has not ended.
Could you join, sir? You open the Google Meet and then enter XPW-BBT-OS.
Sir, it should be without the hyphen. The last 10 without the hyphen. Open Google Meet and then the last 10 words without the hyphen. Just XPW BPTT OSG.
Exactly. XPW followed by the by BPTT followed by OSG.
No hyphen.
No. You leave all those things, but instead you open Google Meet and then enter the last 10 letters. XPW hyphen
hyphen വേണ്ട.
double B double T.
Hyphen vanda. Hyphen illade.
And then OSG. Noble hyphen Noble hyphen is necessary. Oh, that is right. Okay. Hyphen will appear automatically. Okay. Noble, can you call Dr. Yadav? I will give you the number. Could you please I will please just a minute that Dr. Noble will contact you immediately. Okay. Okay. Uh, 956
തോമസ് ചോണിച്ച ഗുഡ് ഈവനിങ്.
Good evening. Good evening.
കെ എ ബ്രഹ്മസന.
മീശ കൊണ്ട് മനസ്സിലാകത്തില്ല.
ലോക്ക്ഡൌൺ കാലത്തെ പരിപാടിയാ. സാബു
ലോക്കിംഗ് ഡൗൺ ദ സേവിങ്.
അതെ അതെ അതെ.
തിരുവന്തോ സാറേ, ഇതേ ഇത് ഡബിൾ ക്ലിക്ക് ചെയ്താൽ ഇമെയിൽ ആണെങ്കിൽ ഇമെയിൽ കിട്ടിയത് ഡബിൾ ക്ലിക്ക് ചെയ്താൽ നേരെ അങ്ങോട്ട് പോകും. അതല്ലേ വേണ്ടത്. ഇതിനകത്ത് ഇത്രയേറെ കോംപ്ലിക്കേറ്റഡ് ആക്കുന്നത്. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പിന്നെ ക്രോമിൽ പോയിട്ട് ഇത് കോപ്പി ചെയ്ത് അങ്ങോട്ട് വെച്ചാൽ.
ഇമെയിലിൽ ഞാൻ കൊടുത്തതാണ്, അതിൽ ക്ലിക്ക് ചെയ്തിട്ട് വരുന്നില്ലെന്നാ പറഞ്ഞത്.
അല്ലല്ല, ഈ ലിങ്ക് അയക്കില്ലേ? നമ്മളൊക്കെ കേറിയ ആ ലിങ്ക് അയച്ചു കൊടുത്തില്ലേ?
ലിങ്കും ഇമെയിലിലെ ലിങ്കാണ് അയച്ചു കൊടുത്തത്, രണ്ടും കൃത്യമായിട്ട്.
സാറ് അയച്ച അവസാനത്തെ ലിങ്ക് ഉണ്ടല്ലോ, എനിക്ക് കിട്ടിയപ്പോൾ ഈ പ്രശ്നം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അതിന്റെ അവസാനം ഒരു ആസ്ട്രിക് ഉണ്ട്. ആസ്ട്രിക് വരുന്നതാണ് പ്രശ്നം.
അത് മാറ്റി വിട്ടായിരുന്നു, വേറെ അവസാനം അയച്ചു. വേറെ ഞാൻ അത് മനസ്സിലാക്കിക്കൊണ്ട് വേറൊന്ന് അയച്ചിരുന്നു. Okay.
Yeah, he joined. Thank God.
Okay, thank God.
Yes, joined.
Yes, he has joined.
Hello.
Okay.
Yes. My
Good
apologies
evening.
for the technical glitch. I'm sorry about the technical glitch.
No,
It was not working on my laptop, but it is now working on my camera. My phone, it's working. You know, younger people are much smarter, so I had to take help of my son.
Okay.
Welcome, Dr. Yadav. Shall we start with silent prayer?
Yes, please.
Yes. Dr. Yogendra Yadav, Reverend Thomas John, Dr. Varghese John, and most distinguished friends and colleagues, a warm welcome to all of you.
കേറിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. അദ്ദേഹം ക്യാമറ വീഡിയോ ഓഫ് ചെയ്തിരിക്കുക. കേറിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. തുടങ്ങാം.
Okay.
എല്ലാവരും മൈക്ക് മ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ ഡോക്ടർ പ്ലീസ്.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And
Let everybody else mute their mics, please.
okay.
Let the host do that. That is the best thing.
Okay. Shall I proceed?
Okay.
Okay. Dr. Yogendra Yadav and most distinguished colleagues and friends, we are meeting amidst many youths. On one side, the pandemic, and in Kerala, not only in Kerala, all along the western coast, heavy rainfall, cyclone, coastal erosion, etc. taking place. Along with that, the nation is facing crisis on all fronts, if different types. So whether it is an appropriate time for us to meet may be a question. But one thing is sure, great lives and their footprints always guide us in the troubled times. Today, we commemorate the 106th birth anniversary of a great person in Indian history, Dr. M.M. Thomas. M.M. Thomas stands tall among the Christian thinkers of the 20th century. More than a theologian or thinker, he was a committed humanist, and he found spirituality in resisting injustice and fighting the dehumanizing forces and powers. No wonder he championed the World Council of Churches program to combat racism, and he resisted the national emergency in India declared by the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Sure, M.M. thought is highly relevant in the present context too. In India today, side by side with the unbridled spread of COVID-19, the nation is going through unprecedented crisis on many fronts: political, cultural, economic, and so on. The legislations of the Parliament of India, like farms laws, labor codes, CAA, national educational policy, etc., etc., seems to have overshadowed the values enshrined in our constitution. Under such a context, the best way to commemorate a birth anniversary of a great person is to read and understand him in the contemporary context. We have the right person this evening for that purpose, and I invite Dr. Varghese George to offer formal welcome and inaugurate the chief guest. Dr. Varghese George.
Thank you, Professor Philippen Thomas, sir. I am extremely happy to have been asked to welcome the speakers and the participants of this webinar being held to celebrate the life of Dr. M.M. Thomas on his 106th birth anniversary. Our main speaker, Professor Yogendra Yadav, needs no introduction. Professor Yadav is a public intellectual. Professor Ramila Thapar once wrote that a public intellectual is one who is not reveling in the comforts of conformity. Professor Yadav has always been with the people. Formerly the director of CSDS and now presently the president of Swaraj Abhiyan and co-president of Kisan Sangharsha Samiti. Professor Yadav has always stood for a just and participatory society. I am extremely happy to welcome Professor Yogendra Yadav to this meeting as the main speaker. The moderator, Reverend Professor Thomas John, was president of M.M. Thomas Trust, as part of the organizing committee. I also welcome Reverend Professor Thomas John as the moderator of this session.
over to Dr. Reverend Thomas John for his remarks as the moderator. Reverend Thomas John.
Has he lost connectivity?
Sorry, I lost the network. Now I think it is resumed. Shiju has been oriented through student Christian movement and has now emerged as a brilliant writer. Shiju will make response in this meeting. I also welcome Shiju Sam Varghese to this session. The trustees of Dr. M.M. Thomas Trust, Peter Johnson, Mrs. Omana Matthew, the president and the secretary of the Tiruvalla Sangam, respectively, Rajan Varghese Vinod, and all other participants. We are extremely happy to all of you with us in this meeting from various parts of the country. Thus, I conclude my words. Thank you.
Over to Dr. Reverend Thomas Johnson for your remarks.
Okay. Our chief guest, Dr. Yogendra Yadav, members of the Tiruvalla Ecumenical Charitable Trust, the Tiruvalla Sangam, and my dear friends and others who would be participating in the webinar from India and abroad. As a nation, we are facing unprecedented crises, and the pandemic has worsened our ability to cope with them and respond to them with clarity and sharpness. Demonetization through the whole unorganized sector, including small and medium enterprises, into utter penury. The special status of the state of Jammu and Kashmir was revoked and reduced them to union territories, diminishing their democratic rights. Citizens Amendment Act 2019 was passed without much deliberation, discriminating Muslims from neighboring countries to equal right to citizenship. 3 farm bills that would change the way Indian farmers would do business were passed in haste despite strong and relentless opposition to the same from the legislators and the farming community. In response to the pandemic, lockdown was imposed without any warning whatsoever, leaving the huge migrant labor population to undertake hazardous journeys back to their home states, trekking hundreds of kilometers, many dying on the way, yet government having no plan to ease their pain or agony. There was criminal negligence on the part of the central government in not warning the states and people of a second wave of the pandemic and preparing for it on a war footing. We are today witnessing the heart-rending scenes of people dying of lack of oxygen and medical care, with the state as an onlooker. In the midst of this worst crisis, instead of showing statesmanship, the PM, Prime Minister, was trotting around addressing large crowds without allowing any COVID protocol as part of, without following any COVID protocol as part of electioneering. In the midst of the worst phase of the pandemic, a large crowd was let loose to
Connectivity problem is there.
Not audible.
I think, Achan, we have some problem.
You invite Dr. Yadav to talk then.
അച്ഛന് വീഡിയോ ഓഫ് ചെയ്താൽ ചിലപ്പോ നടക്കും. ഓഡിയോ മാത്രം.
Thomas Jonathan, can you hear me?
No, we lost connectivity.
Could be weather related too.
Yeah, sometimes.
Can we begin from where I stopped? In the midst of arrogant use of legislative power, total disregard for the secular and federal polity, obscurantism, and superstition of all sorts, we are faced with total lack of governance. Nobody to console people, show them the way, and help them to tide over the worst crisis of this pandemic. As a nation, where are we heading to? Today we are gathered under the shadow of death and death-dealing forces for a ray of hope, remembering our beloved Thomachen, Dr. M.M. Thomas, who introduced Christ to us as the moral force behind social transformation. His ecumenism was one that embraced the whole inhabited earth. He taught us the social and political implications of following Christ and exhorted us to
Thomas Jonathan, can you hear me? Would you please switch off your video? You are not audible.
Can I join now? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I join?
Yes.
Okay, you can join.
Yes. It is in loyalty to this vision. I'm sorry. In these times when free speech is under heavy attack, the use of the word Azadi invites sedition charges. Journalists, researchers, and activists are locked behind bars for terrorism charges, for reporting on the destruction of Adivasi livelihoods by mineral mining companies, supported by coercive forces of the state. The political legacy of M.M. Thomas, a towering figure of the ecumenical movement, is all the more relevant and needed. It is in loyalty to this vision that we are gathered together in this virtual platform to seek together our way forward. We are privileged to have such an eminent person as Mr. Yogendra Yadav to throw light on the crises we are facing and help us to define them so that we can develop strategies to deal with them. As a man who walks the talk, we cannot get a better informed person than Dr. Yogendra Yadav to guide us in our search without taking much of his time and this also much of your time. Let me welcome Dr. Yogendra Yadav to this webinar and invite him to deliver the Dr. M.M. Thomas Memorial Lecture. Dr. Shiju Sam Varghese, one of our friends, now a professor in the Central University of Gujarat, will make a response after the main presentation. 1 hour and 15 minutes is the time allotted to us. If time permits, we can have a few more interventions. However, comments or questions should be 9:30. I ask your cooperation for the successful conduct of this seminar. I'm sorry for the technical snacks. I invite Dr. Yogendra Yadav to give his main address.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Reverend Thomas John. Just wanted to confirm if I'm being heard all right. Is my sound reaching everyone before I start speaking?
Yes.
Thank you. Delighted indeed. I'm grateful, first of all, to the Tiruvalla Ecumenical Charitable Trust and its trustees to have thought of me and to have given me this honor of speaking in memory of Dr. M.M. Thomas, one of the eminent Christian thinkers. When the invitation arrived, I wasn't sure how I fitted into the picture of reflecting on the legacy of a Christian thinker. But then I read about Dr. M.M. Thomas, realized that he took his religious conviction in a direction which is social and political as well. That he stood against injustice, that he very actively participated on issues of race, of inequality, and that he was instrumental in fighting against Indira Gandhi's infamous emergency. That to me sounds like liberation theology of the kind that I would like to see more of. And that gave me the courage, the connect, the title to speak to all of you today. I do realize that we speak in very dark times, on a day when newspapers are full of images, stories, news of floating dead bodies. We should say floating bodies of dead citizens of this country. When you could say dead body, the dead are floating. And I wish to add the country, the society, the nation, the state is sinking. On that day, it looks almost criminal to disengage you from the present and to take you to something wider and deeper. That worries me. Yes, what's happening worries me deeply. How can any Indian or any human being not be concerned, worried, deeply ashamed of what we are witnessing in our country right now in this pandemic? At the same time, there is something much deeper that has been worrying me for the last few years. And that is what I chose to speak on. That's the topic that I've been invited to speak on, which is encountering the crisis to protect the concept of India. As I said, it might look a bit of a luxury in the midst of this pandemic when we should be talking about oxygen, when we should be talking about vaccination, when we should be talking about the absence of a health policy and perspective in this country, when we should be talking about the strategy for the way out of the current crisis, at that moment to reflect on something like the concept of India, the idea of India, as I prefer to call it, might look like a luxury. But I do believe that the way to honor the memory of the likes of Dr. M.M. Thomas is to step back from the immediate and think of something longer, something deeper, something wider. So allow me to use the occasion today to speak about something that has been worrying me for the last few years, and which I call the challenge to the very idea of India. So in what follows, and I propose to speak for less than 30 minutes, I hope, so that we can have some engagement, some interaction thereafter, and maybe close by 9:15. In what I propose to speak, I will make essentially 5 points. I've been a teacher, so I like to just put those points on the blackboard straight away. I would argue, first of all, that that idea of India is not just an abstraction. There's something tangible, real about idea of India. It's not just a metaphor. Number 2, that this idea of India is under challenge like never before. Never in the last 74 years has the idea of India faced the kind of challenge that it faces today. Third, I would go on to say that this challenge is deeper than it looks because its sources are much, much deeper than we care to investigate. And that what we are dealing with is a cultural, ideological, and political hegemony. My 4th point would be to say, therefore, simple ways of dealing with this, older standard ways, may not work. They are unlikely to work. And final point would be to say, therefore, we have to think of an alternative strategy of counter. I will spend some time talk about the immediate, the medium term, and the long-term challenge. I hope the discussion on the long-term challenge would connect me to the legacy of Dr. M. Thomas. So let me begin by making the first point, which is that idea of India is not just a metaphor. There's something tangible there. The word idea of India, the concept, the phrase has been in use for quite some time. My friend Sunil Khilnani made it quite popular with his book by the same name, The Idea of India. But the impression is that, look, these are things that every country talks about. Is there something, what is the content of this idea of India? When I speak in Hindi, my own mother tongue, I do not use the word idea, concept. I used the expression swadharma. Swadharma. Dharma not in the sense of a religion, not in the sense of a denomination, but in the sense of a deeper ethical value. So my question, my argument has been that there is a swadharma of India. I do not know if every country in the world must have it, but India, as we know, the Republic of India that was inaugurated on 26th of January 1950, does have an idea, does have a swadharma. And our challenge is to understand that swadharma. I've been writing on this, and I don't wish to take long time on this. I will summarize it for simplicity in 3 Ds. One day I would like to probably speak for 1 hour only on this one point of how do we arrive at something called the idea of India? Is there an idea? Can we claim that what we understand is the real idea? Someone else's concept is not correct? I do believe that the Republic of India is founded on 3 pillars, 3 Ds. These 3 pillars are not figment of my imagination. They are written into the Constitution of India. And Constitution of India is not someone's arbitrary writing. Constitution of India is just the encapsulated wisdom of the Indian freedom struggle. And the Indian freedom struggle, the national movement of India, is in many ways the bridge between modernity and traditions. It is our civilizational values brought to modernity, which is India's national movement. Therefore, the idea of India, which is implicit in our constitution, is something which is not merely arbitrary figment of imagination. The 3Ds are democracy, diversity, development. Someone can say, what's Indian about these things? These are taken from the West. Yes, many of these ideas have traveled to us from the West, at least in the present form. But the manner in which they were absorbed and transformed in India is what makes them so very Indian. Democracy, they claim, is a Greek idea. Maybe it is, we don't know. I don't want to engage with that debate at all. But what interests me is that the idea of democracy was democratized in India. Before India, everyone thought that democracy is essentially an idea that only very highly educated and rich societies can afford. India was the first country in the world that made it possible for people to think that in a large, poor, largely uneducated country, democracy could still be practiced. So in that sense, India democratized the idea of democracy. That's one contribution. On diversity is, of course, nothing specially Indian about diversity. Diversity is the state of nature. It's all over in the biological universe, in the natural universe, in the social universe, in the political universe. India did not invent diversity, but India did something unique. India made it possible for people to think that modern nation states could be reconciled with deep diversity. If we look at the European example, the history of Europe, modern Europe, is a history of inability to deal with diversity. The moment you have, French speakers and German speakers, and as the Yugoslavian experiment recently has drawn our attention to, the history of modern Europe is in many ways the history of trying to coincide political boundaries with cultural boundaries. The moment you have cultural differences, you need to have a separate country. You need to have a different state. And that's why Europe, which is actually no bigger than India, has so many countries. And before India, everyone believed that a nation was impossible in conditions as diverse as this. This is what the British colonial rulers thought. They thought and said clearly, how can this country, with such diversities of caste, religion, language, ethnicity, race, everything, how can you possibly become a nation? India demonstrated to the world that deep diversities were compatible with nation. That people with such deep diversities could live within a single political unit. That's diversity. And the third, development. On development, I think India cannot claim to have done something remarkable. As we speak today, as we speak about the pandemic, as we speak about those dead bodies that are floating, these are not dead bodies of anyone. These are dead bodies of the poorest of poor, who cannot afford even the ritual of burning the dead, because it's actually so costly. So in that country, if someone were to claim that India demonstrated development to the world, that would be a spurious claim, bogus claim. But India did something else. Some Indians questioned the idea of development. Some Indians showed a different path of development. Some Indians, people like Mahatma Gandhi, and I'm sure Thomas, they showed a different concept of what development could mean. Gandhi's talisman. Think of the poorest, the weakest person you've met in your life. and take decisions on any policy, keeping that person in mind. Last person first is an approach that was developed in India, although Indian state failed to live up to that at all. So I'm claiming that these three ideas, democracy in a large, poor, and uneducated country, diversity, deep diversity in a modern nation state, and development for the last person, an alternative model of development. These are three key ideas that underlie the idea of India. These are the three pillars, three constituents of the idea of India. And this is not my imagination. This is written into the Constitution of India. These are the pillars of the Republic of India. Second point, and I will make that point very quickly because I don't hope to encounter any objections on that. And I suppose everyone would agree with that very, very quickly, which is that this idea of India faces a challenge like never before. To be fair, this idea has faced challenges right from the beginning. Democracy, emergency was the biggest challenge. Let us not pretend that democracy faces the first challenge today. Diversity, how can anyone forget 1984? How can we forget 2002 Gujarat massacre? There have been challenges to the idea of diversity many times. And development, the idea development for the last person is challenged every single day in this country. But what we are witnessing today is a simultaneous assault on all these three, of a kind and of a force which is unprecedented. All three pillars of the idea of India are being challenged. They are being challenged with political power, street power, and state power. A combination of street power and state power is now challenging this in a way which is unprecedented, where constitutional authority is being used to undo the constitution, where public is being mobilized to undo the republic. That is the challenge that we face today. Democracies in 21st century do not die when a dictator comes on television and says democracy is over. From tomorrow you shall have a martial law. That happened in 20th century. That doesn't happen in 21st century. Democracies are throttled inch by inch in ways which are sophisticated, in ways which are very polite, in ways which are constitutional, used to throttle democracy. This is how democracies die today. So what we have today is an electoral authoritarianism, a regime where elections are held more or less fairly. Increasingly, one has to underline the less part of it. But elections are held. But beyond two elections, there is virtually no democracy. Today, as I speak, the news is flashing with me that in Delhi police has registered cases against 15 persons. They have been arrested for pasting a poster. The poster simply said, Mr. Prime Minister, why have you given the vaccine meant for my child? Why have you sent that vaccine abroad? Now, you may agree with this, you may disagree with this, but how can someone be arrested for putting this poster? That's the challenge. So we are in an electoral authoritarianism. And while India is not a Hindu Rashtra, is unlikely to be officially declared so, we are in a de facto non-theological majoritarianism. So it will not be called Hindu Rashtra. I think not. I hope not. But for all practical purposes, minorities, especially the Muslims, have been reduced to the status of a second-rate citizen. And as far as development is concerned, I don't need to belabor it very much. As I said, this idea was violated every day. What is so special about the last 6-7 years is the brazenness of it. Earlier, the poor did not figure on the agenda of the country, but there were attempts to pretend as if they did. So some Manrega would be announced, some schemes would be announced once in a while. What we are witnessing today is a brazen rule of capital, where there is not even a pretense, not even a fig leaf to care for the poor. In the midst of a pandemic, the regime is out to create central vista. I mean, that to me symbolizes how brazen, how naked, how crude this regime of the rich, for the rich, by the rich can be. So as I said, I wouldn't belabor this very much. We might all agree that this idea of India is under challenge, under threat like never before. My third point is to say this challenge is not an accident. It is not that one bad person, particularly evil and particularly clever, has suddenly come to dominate the country. A bit of that is correct, but that's not the whole truth. The arrival of the current regime to power in 2014 was not an accident. It was not the inevitable consequence either. I call it democracy capture. Democracy capture is something when democracy is captured by using democratic means. So a democracy capture took place. But this democracy capture is underwritten by something much, much deeper, which is cultural and ideological hegemony. And this is something we must concede, that it is not merely that one regime, a party has come to dominate the country, somehow win elections, and then use it for means which are in ways which are completely disagreeable to all of us. We must agree that many of these things have support of a vast majority of people in this country. What I'm saying may not apply to the pandemic, because that's quite clear. What the government is doing today does not enjoy the popular support. That people are very angry, very annoyed, and they are very disappointed. But as I said, I'm not talking of this situation right now. If we focus on the larger situation of what I call electoral authoritarianism and non-theological majoritarianism, then much of this has enjoyed support of the public. That many of these ideas which are being pushed in the name of Hindutva actually enjoy hegemony. Hegemony is when a ruler rules not merely with the help of coercion, but actual consent, that it enjoys consent of the people, that many of these ideas are held very deeply, that some of these ideas which go against the Constitution of India, which go against the idea of India, have been in the public domain for quite some time. They have been very carefully mobilized, marshaled, when everyone else was almost unconcerned about defending the idea of India. This is the challenge. So there is a real challenge, and the real challenge has much deeper roots than we are willing to acknowledge, willing to admit. My point 4 follows from that, simply that therefore standard recipes do not work. The idea that, all right, regimes come and go, they will also make their errors and they will be kicked out. I don't think that's going to happen. Everyone thought last year when the pandemic hit the country, there were 3 big faux pas committed by this government, 3 big disasters. Any government in the world would have been kicked out for even one of them. One was lockdown in the country. which was so badly executed. Second was the economic disaster. Economy just tanked. So bad handling of pandemic first wave, very poor management of economy. Economy was in depression. And third, on the external front, the government conceded territories to China in a way that had not happened since 1962. Now, in any other democracy, a government would have been extremely unpopular if they did any one of these three lapses. But as we know, probably by the end of the year, the regime had regained its popularity. So the idea that they would commit mistakes and therefore would naturally be kicked out is not true. The idea that you can speak the old secular language of secularism, of constitution, of democracy, and people will gradually come back. After all, people will not tolerate authoritarian regime. And Indian people are democratic at heart, and they will, of course, come back and kick out authoritarian regimes. Well, that may happen in the last instance, but then there are many instances between now and the last instance, and mostly we live our lives in second last instances. So we don't know. We comfort in the fact that this would naturally happen. And a certain kind of routine Modi bashing, as I call it, is not going to help us at all, because that only goes on to strengthen people's suspicion, people's sense of adulation for the top leader. The idea that opposition unity will achieve the trick is also not going to work, because opposition unity is necessary. It is not sufficient. All this will not work because we are dealing with ideological and cultural hegemony. There is no way to address the situation. There is no way to defend the idea of India without taking on that deeper challenge of the cultural hegemony that we are confronted with, the hegemony that seeks to undo the constitutional values, that seeks to challenge the idea of India. Which is what brings me to the final and fifth point that I want to make. And my fifth point is, counter-hegemony requires a fresh strategy, fresh thinking. We need to go beyond the standard formula. We need to go beyond the regular themes that we have heard. We need to go beyond the standard recipes. Let me speak of that as threefold strategies that we need. One is electoral, second is education, third is cultural ideological challenge. We need to, in order to combat this hegemony, in order to meet the challenge of to the very idea of India, we need to work on all the three planes simultaneously. One is a narrow electoral political plane. How do you ensure that the regime goes out in a democratic manner? Through elections, which is what we imagine normal things to happen. Second, how do you take on the regime on the streets, in movements, andolans? And third is, how do you challenge the very cultural ideological foundations of this onslaught on the idea of India? I will not speak very much on the first one. That's a question of political strategy, etc. I would simply say, let us not get overexcited about the results from the recent assembly elections. Yes, the BJP was defeated in West Bengal. Yes, that has given a big respite to this country. Yes, it has given us breathing space. But let us not delude ourselves into believing that the idea of Hindutva has been defeated. We just have to look at Assam to see what's happening. And if we look around the country, we know that many of these ideas are creeping up, that this challenge is very much there. And on the electoral front, to my mind, the idea that that simple oppositional unity will work, to my mind, is not true. What we need is a positive alternative. We need not just political alternative, we need alternative politics. That is a challenge, but I will not spend too much time on that particular challenge right now today. Second, we need movement. My own conviction, my own sense is that in this country today, the real counter-hegemonic force is not political parties. The real opposition in this country is not in the parliament. It's out there on the street. We witnessed the NTCA movement. We saw what kind of mobilization it drew, largely from minority community, largely from Muslims as they were targeted. But the mobilization and a small portion of that, which is not those who were targeted themselves, but those who thought this was an attack on the idea of India, they were unwilling to accept it. We witnessed the strength of NTCA movement, which got dissipated, unfortunately, as soon as the first wave of COVID arrived. And then we have witnessed the farmers' movement that simply refuses to go away. And the old tricks of what they did with the NTCA movement are not going to work here. It is a historic movement, a movement with enormous consequences, a movement whose impact goes much beyond the 3 laws that the movement seeks to oppose, much beyond the MSP gains that the movement needs to make. In many ways, I think farmers have emerged as the vanguard for defense of Indian democracy and republic. So, to my mind, while electoral political terrain is important, and in the last instance, all big changes have to come via that terrain, via that channel. That's not the principal channel where the changes will begin. To my mind, the real resistance is happening on the ground in movements. We've seen movement on secularism. We've seen movement on farmers' rights. And my sense is that we might witness a movement of the unemployed youth. These are the movements which would generate counter-hegemonic force and counter-hegemonic pressure. But all this is insufficient. You need something else, which is cultural battle. Let us be honest and accept that today we have the regime rules over us the way it does because we lost a cultural battle. We lost a battle of ideas. Let us be candid and acknowledge that we lost because actually we never fought this battle. Because we had a wonderful constitution, we had independence, we had our great freedom struggle, and we who followed up, the generation, my father's generation, my generation, we were complacent. We simply assumed that we have the secular constitution, we have a democratic system, all is well, and I can focus on myself, my family, and my own profit. We simply did not work hard to defend the values of Indian Constitution, the values of Indian Republic. This is when those who wanted to undo this republic were working very, very hard. It's only rarely that I can praise the RSS for anything, but there's one thing I must admire them for, which is that for more than 90 years, now we're close to 100 years in a few years' time, this organization has worked tirelessly to push its own cultural and ideological agenda. They worked despite that huge setback of being associated with Mahatma Gandhi's assassination. They worked despite a ideological climate that was very hostile to them, but they kept working. And we, who think of ourselves as defenders of this Republican Constitution, were quiet, sleeping, not working. And worst of all, we were condescending. We looked at the people of this country as people who didn't need to be spoken to. We spoke in English. We spoke like the elite. We kept our distances. We did not merge with society. We did not take their beliefs seriously. We did not take their traditions seriously. In many of the progressive circles, I do not know about Christianity. I don't have that kind of deep immersion in the Christian society to be able to comment about it. But I can say about Hindu society that it has been quite fashionable among intellectuals and activists to deride Hinduism in general, to mock at it, to think that Hinduism is the cause of all the evil, to think that it is, to refuse to engage with religious traditions, to refuse to engage with the language of the people. That, to my mind, is the biggest problem that we need to rectify. It's not a small problem. The fact is that the intellectual and political elite, particularly of this country, was deracinated, cut off from the society and its culture. That is a ground we need to recover. We need to recover our religious traditions. There is no single tradition in this country. There are multiple religious traditions of this country. There are multiple traditions in this country. There are scores of languages. That is where we need to immerse ourselves. Hindutva manages to, the package called Hindutva manages to convince people that it works for the majority, while it does not, because it bothers to speak their language. It bothers to connect to them. We don't. So in the long run, to my mind, there is no way except to take on the cultural challenge. To break hegemony, you don't need only political strategy. You need cultural strategy, cultural politics. And that cultural politics has to be to recover our traditions, recover those traditions which we do not speak about. Traditions of Dalits in this country, traditions of Adivasis in this country, intellectual traditions, social traditions, liberation traditions. We need a liberation theology equivalent for Hinduism. We need a liberation theology equivalent for Islam, for Sikhism, for Christianity. That is what would work. That is what would help us to recover the lost ground. A formal language of constitutionalism, liberalism, progressivism, secularism will not work. We need a new language for all these ideas, ideas of equality, of justice, of fraternity, which are built into our constitution. We need to reimagine and reinvigorate democracy, diversity, and development. And for that task, we need to take inspirations from the likes of Dr. M.M. Thomas. I wish there were more of him. I wish every religion had it. I wish every tradition had it. Maybe they already have it. Maybe we just need to discover them. Maybe we just need to connect to them. That, to me, is the way forward for alternative politics, for recovering the idea of India, for reclaiming the Republic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yogendra Yadav. You have been successful in driving home very, very clearly the kind of crisis we are facing, defining it, and reminding us that it has deep roots in our culture and ideology, and the need to really engage with our religions and our traditions so that we can engage with the kind of Hindutva culture and ideology. And while you seemed not to go with the feeling that everything is going to be all right, things will be all right by a democratic election, you have rightly pointed out that that is not going to be the way, and we are immensely benefited by your lecture because we are a community that searches for ways to deal with this crisis, and probably we need more of your input. Probably we should listen to you for an hour or more in a more educational atmosphere, so that we can work as we can connect each other and work together to deal with this crisis. Now I invite Shiju Sam to respond to this lecture.
Thank you, Thomas Jonathan. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Good.
thank you. Thank you, Dr. Yogendra Yadav, for this wonderful message in this evening. The idea of India is something which we must uphold. There is no doubt about it. And as you rightly pointed out, what are the challenges we are facing at the moment with the rise of this right-wing populist government and the kind of actions, very radical and the actions which are deeply challenging the very idea of India. You have rightly pointed out four major points, and you have guided us about how we can create a strategy to reclaim the idea of India, which is now under danger. So in connection with what you have said, I would like to reflect on a few points. At one level, I am making these comments as a student of social science, but more importantly, I am making this comment also as someone who belongs to this small community of Christians who take their faith seriously, who try to critically look at their own religious traditions, who try to renew or reconstruct the religion or Christianity on the basis of the new ethical values of democracy and diversity and development, as you pointed out. So my reflections are coming from these two epistemological roots. So when we think about India as a nation, the idea of political community becomes very important, and its connection with the nation state or the state as an entity around which this national community is organized. So here the idea of diversity becomes so important, as you rightly pointed out. But what I would like to add to what you have already said is that this idea of diversity should not be a noun, but it should be a verb. It should be a practice, as you rightly pointed out. When we think about diversity as a practice, a critical look at the way we practice diversity itself becomes important. Usually the trend is that when we talk about unity in diversity, or when we talk about plurality, we never try to look critically at what are the ideas of diversity, or what are the practices of diversity which are acceptable to the nation as a liberal democratic entity. So maybe we need a more deeper engagement with the idea of diversity. And as you rightly pointed out, what are the diversities India has lost in the process of its development in the last 75 years? This may be the very local languages and the live worlds which are represented in these languages, maybe certain practices which are much more are much more useful for the development of this new idea of India as a democratic concept. So I think instead of fixing what this diversity meant to be, we should actually work with the very idea of diversity at a deeper level by looking at the practices, challenging the practices, and the last point which you made, I mean, this educational process, or linking it with the local social movements which are working at that domain. So these movements have a very important, pertinent role to play in developing a critique of this diversity and its acceptance within the nationalist frame, to even go beyond that, to radically challenge the very idea of diversity, which has become largely acceptable in India. And again, as you rightly pointed out, this acceptable idea of diversity itself is now under challenge under the current regime, because they do not like that very idea of diversity, which was part of the very nationalist imagination of the country. So that I completely agree with you. And again, there is a question about the consensus given to this regime in the form of popular will. I think a little more, reflection, critical reflection is required at that front, because still there is a large popular support to the regime. And as you pointed out, this is not about one person or an oligarchy who is running the show, but rather there is this fascism works at the micro level. There is a microphysics of fascism which is active in the body of the nation, which is present in every dimension of our everyday life. So this is why when this poster was pasted in the streets of Delhi, any policeman can become that authoritarian figure who can take action. His will becomes the will of the nation or the will of the Führer. So at that level, fascism as an idea, the Indian version of this fascism, the Hindutva ideology, becomes much more deep and strong. So if we have to challenge this idea, then we even have to radically rethink the way the liberal democracy was imagined and how we have reached this cul-de-sac in the process. Then you have rightly pointed out that we need new cultural ideas or counter-hegemonic ideas to challenge the cultural hegemony of Hindutva. I completely agree with that, but there is a problem with the very idea of secularism, which is fundamental to this crisis. Though originally, secularism may not be about rejecting all the religious ideas, or saying that we have to create a new kind of space where church or religion is not part of that. But I think that itself has become a serious problem, where as you rightly pointed out, it has created a space for the Hindutva ideology to enter into the life worlds of the people, because no secular ideology in this country was ever taking people's beliefs and their theology and their God experience in their everyday life seriously. So there was a kind of vacuum being created in the last several decades. And this vacuum, as you rightly pointed out, is clearly being exploited and manipulated by the Hindutva forces. And they have become very successful in doing that. So now the question is, can our secular counter-hegemonic practices help us reclaim this space? If we have to, if we have to, do that, we will have to rethink the very idea of secularism itself. Maybe we should think about creating, understanding the Hindutva as a political theology, and finding, counter theologies to challenge this. And here the problem is that when we talk about counter theologies, it is not about, simply accepting the dominant theological frameworks, given by the existing religions in this country. Say, for example, I'm coming from the Christian community, so I know that there is a very strong hegemonic, maybe to some extent, fascist, we can say, kind of theological hegemony, which is propagated by the dominant churches. So this makes these churches allies of the ruling regime. It's quite evident in India. I'm not talking about many of the churches of Adivasis and Dalits in this country, but the churches of the dominant communities. So same is the case with other religions too. So when we talk about the theology, there is also we should develop a critique of these dominant theologies, and we should look for the alternative theologies, political theologies, which can help us to reclaim and rebuild this idea of India. I know that it is not very easy, but there are definitely such such new visions emerging from basic communities in the country and from the church itself. So that is an important domain we should target, so that we can think about, we can reimagine our understanding of secularism itself in a new way, so that it can help us to challenge these fascist forces. Then, since we do not have much time, there is just one point I would like to make on the non-party political process, which you always highlight in your talks and your writings, coming from the Rajni Kothari's tradition. So I completely agree with that. The new social movements are very important. The popular, the alternatives from the grassroots are very important. There is no doubt about it. But as we have seen in the case of this farmers' struggle, when a struggle spontaneously emerges from the belly of India, and when it marches forward to the capital as a serious threat to the existing regime, be it the Congress regime or BJP regime or whatever be the nature of the regime, then we can see that this intellectual political elite, the elite activists who try to participate in that struggle which emerged from the countrysides, and then in the process the entire movement gets hijacked. Somehow the farmers' struggle is surviving. You know much better about it than me. But generally, if you look at these political movements, none of these political movements are capable of developing into a major challenge to the dominant ideologies or the dominant form of the state. And this elite political class has a very strong role in it. So we should, I think, critically look at ourselves as the civil society, public, or these activists who are coming from these urban locations. So that is something which we should take seriously if we are really serious about building this idea of a new India, which is based on democracy, diversity, and democracy. Then one point which I think you have missed in your talk, I think is very important. That is the idea of, I mean, the entire picture you were presenting, your arguments were based on an understanding of the nation and its internal forces and processes and ideologies. But I think we should look at it also from an externalist point of view by connecting it with the transnational domain, by linking it with the global processes which are going on, and especially with the question of capitalism. This capitalism is no more the kind of capitalism Marx imagined in the 19th century, or the major Marxist thinkers after Marx imagined the 20th century. We are at a critical juncture of the development of capitalism. And also parallelly all over the world, populist governments have emerged, including in the USA. So how do we link the process of this populist, government and this, entering into power in India to this larger picture? And how is it connected with the larger political economic processes and the transnational ideological processes? So I think these are some points I would like, some reflections I would like to make in the context of your talk. Thank you once again for this wonderful talk, which catalyzed. I hope it will catalyze the way we think about the current crisis. So thank you so much. So I think your mic is muted.
Jonathan,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Shiju. We can have one intervention.
Yeah, I would like to intervene, please.
Yeah.
Dr. Yadav, I'm very happy with your thoughts, which are very, very well articulated. Especially, I like the way the intellectual giant that you are, especially from the time of Anna Hazare and Arvind Kejriwal and Prashant Bhushan. And we really thought that something would change in India that time. But nothing happened. I mean, it's just gone somewhere else. I totally agree with you. You see that the standard recipes will not work, and we do need definitely the concept or the idea of the India to be reclaimed. How it should be done, I think on three fronts we have failed. One is, I would like you to comment on that, is the intellectuals have failed the country in that they have not really grappled with these problems. Secondly, I would think that we have not really supported the farmers union, as you said, education, andolam, and I'm not. We do not have time to really go into a deep debate into this. But what you say correctly, the cultural and ideological battle has not been really fought with the fascist forces. Thirdly, about my community, the Christian community, I would like to submit that we have not really studied Christ, because Christ in this situation in today's world would have reacted against this. And unfortunately, we are only theoretizing MM Thomas and not really putting him into practice in real day life, into a real battle. Just like Gandhi, his theory, he put into practice. We have not done it. We have failed in that. So I agree with you. We do need a real battle. And therefore, I would also ask you whether a third front in the next national election would work. And how can we really, as intellectuals, really get into this battle which Christ would have got into also? Thank you.
Yeah, it would be good if you can tell your name also, because.
Yeah, my name's Ipe George. Ipe George.
Ipe George. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I must give some time for Yogendra to conclude. Can I do that?
Yes, please. I just have to thank, actually. I should particularly thank Shiju for understanding what I was saying so carefully and so deeply. So I take your point that we need to think of diverse ways of diversity. Diversity itself should not be standardized. Existing kind of secularism will not work. That the counter theologies have to have the courage to challenge the theological establishment. We may need to rethink liberal democratic imagination. I value the point about transnational capital and the global situation, which is something missing from my picture. So I'll think and get, maybe think hard about it. But thank you for these sympathetic remarks and taking my ideas forward. And I almost entirely agree with Ike George about the points that he made. About the third front succeeding, look, my sense is simply this. If third front is a coalition of existing opposition parties, then that is necessary, but that is not sufficient. We need a third force in politics, a third force, which is a force of alternative ideas, which is a force that has an alternative vision of India, which has a different political culture. So we need a third force, which is different from the third front. That's all I have time for right now. I had actually, there is a very important meeting about the farmers' movement, which is going on. And I will have to excuse myself. But thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, this honor. And thanks for listening. And I look forward to your critical comments. Please do send it to me. Those who wish to write, please send me these at my email, which the trust would happily provide you. It's also yogendra.yadav@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And somebody will be saying a word of vote of thanks.
Actually, you may conclude with the vote of thanks.
Okay. So today it was extremely useful. I was much depressed by the climate, all that is happening around us. But thank you for giving us a ray of hope. Things are not easy, but I'm sure that we have a community that would take your words seriously. And our challenge is how we can take the last part of your challenge, take it forward. Probably we need more of your help in that discussion, and probably this platform can facilitate that discussion in the days to come. Thank you very much.
A word of special thanks to our technical advisor, Dr. Noble, for providing the technical support and expertise to organize this meeting. Also, we are very thankful to, once again, we placed on record our sincere thanks to Dr. Yogendra Yadav, and we assure you that discussion will continue regarding the concept you pointed out, democracy, diversity, and development. Thank you very much. Achin, please conclude.
Yeah. So, do you want us to say the Lord's Prayer?
Okay.
Okay. So, let us say the Lord's Prayer.